The Committee on Energy and Utilities, Finance and Policy will come to order. Today is Thursday, March 14th, 2019, and our first item on the agenda is Senate File 2342. Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move the A1 amendment. This is an author's amendment to get the bill in the shape that I would like it for presentation.
Senator Osmek moves the A1 amendment. I will note there is a quorum. Senator Osmek moves the A1 author's amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senate File 2342 is a bill to help what has been happening in Minnesota and across the nation. More and more electric vehicles are becoming more and more prevalent because they're becoming more and more affordable. We're not saying that it's going to replace a combustion engine anytime soon, but it is a reality of our society, whether it's here in Minnesota or other places. Senate File 2342 is a revolving loan fund to help businesses and other organizations, primarily targeted at businesses, to be able to put in charging stations to help with this industry. Businesses, generally speaking, and some might come up here and argue with me, generally don't have the cash flow or overhead to be able to afford these levels these pieces of equipment. They are in the business of selling usually other things such as food, beverages, trinkets, whatever the case might be, and they really don't have a lot of spare money within their budgets to be able to afford to put in charging stations that people with electric vehicles would like to have. Senate File 2342 provides a one-time expenditure from the Renewable Development Account of $1.5 million to be sent to the Department of Commerce, I believe it is, to create a revolving loan fund. The loan fund itself would be a fund where organizations can apply for a loan from that fund to be able to put in EV charging stations. The way the loan is paid back is that the EV charging stations would have on it a required fee, which is in section. I think it's in the user fee section on page 3, line 11. But there would be a fee attached to each charge. So when you plug in, you will pay right out of the gates, before you even pay for the electricity you use, you will pay a fee. That fee will go back in and fed back into paying back the loan that was taken out to put the charging station in. And at one point when the loan is repaid, the fee can be reduced or is reduced so that after we've paid for that charging station, that the fee is reduced and there's still money going into that fund, that revolving loan. Ideally, what will happen is all of the charging stations will go in, the fees will be recovered, that will recover the $1.5 million that we will be using from the RDA, and eventually at some point in time, it probably is going to take quite a few years, that $1.5 million from the RDA will be sent back to the RDA. So it will turn into a self-sufficient revolving loan fund. It's not a perfect fund. It's not a perfect world. I know that there are people who dislike with a passion electric vehicles. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. But I think this is a way to help Minnesotans be able to have more options on charging stations. I think I've even read some studies where if there are charging stations available, people who have electric vehicles actually spend more time at those businesses as they're charging up their vehicles, which is good for the business. So, members, that is the bill in a nutshell. I'm willing to take any questions you might have. I think we have one testifier on the list, being Mr. Seidel, but I'd certainly be welcome to any comments or suggestions from this. I know this might be, for me, it seemed to be a little bit of an unusual bill, but it actually makes a very good use of the RDA, and it is pro-business as well as pro-Minnesotan. So I'll answer any questions, or we can move on to the testifier.
Mr. Seidel, if you would please come up to the table. Thank you for being here. Please state your name for the record and then begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Adam Seidel, Executive Director of the Minnesota Conservative Energy Forum. MnSTEF promotes and educates on opportunities to modernize our Minnesota energy economy and advance clean energy technology under conservative principles like market innovation and private enterprise. Senate File 2342 is a good step forward for electric vehicle expansion in Minnesota under these principles. We encourage and support the bill, and we'd like to thank Senator Osmick for his interest in leadership in the area of EVs. Not only is this an important and rapidly growing technology area, but frankly, EVs are just plain really cool. Electric vehicles face an important chicken versus the egg problem, though, as they continue to expand. Will the market provide more charging infrastructure once EVs are more popular, or will EVs become more popular as more convenient charging infrastructure is rolled out? MnSTEF believes that there is significant evidence that a rollout to expand charging infrastructure will reduce barriers that will lead to greater EV adoption by consumers, particularly those outside urban center areas. Greater Minnesotans deserve the same right to take part in these exciting new technologies just as much as residents do in the urban core, and this legislation is a good, frugal nudge in the right direction for these needed infrastructure improvements. We'd also like to point out that the bill's support for private companies' investments in these technologies. Currently, the MPCA has their loan program with the VW settlement money that places significant favor and gives a lot of points to government institutions that want to do these investments. We don't believe that a wholly government-centric approach is the right way on this, and as the senator pointed out, Senate File 2342 puts private businesses on equal footing and lets them actually get in there and make these investments to attract businesses or attract customers, expand their business, and it's significantly more helpful, we think evidence exists, for a prospective EV driver to be able to charge in locations as they're going about their normal daily routine, at the stores that they frequent, as they're going about their errands, or even once restrictions and regulations are reduced in this area, at the normal service stations off of Minnesota's interstates and highways that people are already stopping at to power up their cars through traditional methods. So Senator Osmick's approach here allows the private sector to make these investments and put those investments where people want to use them, which is where businesses know that they can attract the customers to help repay these loan amounts. So we thank the chair for his continued support and interest in this technology, and we look forward to continuing to work with him and the committee on these adoptions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seidel. Questions from the committee to the author or the testifier? Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Osmick, or to Mr. Seidel, has there been any pre-work done on this? I see that a report to the legislature by, actually, today, a year from tomorrow, would give us an account of a description of the projects, account of loans, the balance in the loan, the explanation of administrative expenses. But how much work has already been done on a lot of the requirements that are on page 2 and part of 3? Do you know? I would assume there's quite a bit, actually.
Senator Osmick.
Mr. Chair, Senator Rosen, actually I haven't worked much with Commerce on this particular. We actually have been whipping this together rather quickly. That's why the rollout here is for the report to the legislature is as timed as you are, as well as the money. The money is actually, if you remember the spreadsheet that we had, doesn't actually trigger until fiscal year 21 from the RDA. So this is just start the program, and I anticipate that we may have to make some modifications as we engage with Commerce and get the program in the shape it's going to be at. But we do have plenty of time. But I thought in this session it's a good idea to get the ball rolling.
Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Osmick, I know this is being sent to Finance. Perhaps in Finance we could have the Department of Commerce come and talk about what they already have in place. That is, it would be interesting to know what their projections would be, too, going forward. I think it's a great bill.
Senator Osmick.
Point well taken. I will engage them when we meet to the next stop. I get a little worried about what we did to Mr. Sullivan the last time he was in front of my committee, so perhaps we can do that. I think this is something that we can certainly get done. Is Ian back? He had a few transfusions of blood, so I think he's okay now.
Any further discussion? Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Osmick. Two things. One, you don't have a maximum loan amount in here. I wonder, first of all, how much are these charging stations, and how many do you think are going to be covered by this $1.5 million?
Mr. Chair, Senator Marty, I will be acknowledged that I am not sure how much of $1.5 million. It also depends on how many businesses are going to be taking advantage of this. So I guess I would get that for us in the finance. This is really a fast breaker. If you look at the date, we actually put this together fairly quickly, plus the amendment. But I think 1.5 million, as much as we can get, is better than zero. If anybody's in the audience that knows how much these charging stations run, I'd certainly be happy with that. Senator Simonson, will you take over for, we have had someone, the chair exit, so.
Senator Osmic, that's a good point. I think at this point in time, if you're good, we can ask if anybody in the audience wishes to testify either in support or against the bill or offer us information. Now would be a time. They are not running up, Senator Osmic.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Seidel might have some information on the charging station.
Thank you, Senator
Mr.
Osmic.
Seidel.
And thank you, Senator Osmic and Mr. Chair. Senator Marty, the cost per station has deferred, if you look at studies across the country, has deferred fairly wildly depending on if you're just talking about the above ground infrastructure, if you're talking about redigs, or to Senator Osmic's point, if you have a larger retail facility, for example, that maybe is installing a dozen or so of these facilities and is also expanding their underground metering and infrastructure, that obviously changes the cost. Even at the heaviest cost per, where you're really putting in new infrastructure, you're still talking about a few thousand per parking spot for these projects. So a dollar value of 1.5 million would make significant progress in rolling out EV charging infrastructure.
Any other committee discussion? Senator Osmic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would then move Senate File 2342 as amended be recommended to pass by this body and referred to full finance.
And all those members in support of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Pass that back.
Thank you, members. You can tell it's deadline week because senators are going in and out of committee, so we will have that happening all afternoon. Senate File 1456. This bill is going to be laid over for continued work. It is not moving forward at this point in time. We will be entertaining amendments and discussion to this, and then I think the author would like some additional time to continue to work on this, and we'll see what we do with it going into the future. So, that being said, Senate File 1456, Senator Senjum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Mr. Chair, I appreciate the hearing today. Obviously, apparently, judging from the audience, there's some interest in this bill. I guess not all for your electric car bill, but or charging bill, but that's fine. We move forward. Mr. Chair and members, just to get the bill in order, I have several amendments that I'd like to offer, perhaps starting with the A11 amendment.
Senator Senjum moves the A11 amendment. This is an author's amendment. This is the primary jurisdiction of the bill. We'll start moving on all of these amendments up front, so you get it's in the bill shape that you want. Senator Senjum, do you have any additional comment?
Mr. Chair, just a reminder, there's a tweak to the A11 which came up in just the last minute. Maybe Mr. Bull can help me with that language.
Ms. Fontaine?
Yes, Mr. Chair and members, we do need to amend the A11. What we need to do is delete line 1.11, and then after line 1.20, it would say page 9, line 12, after communities, insert in Minnesota.
Okay.
So we will incorporate that oral amendment into the A11.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to just introduce all these amendments at the same time, or you want to go through them sequentially?
Let's go through them sequentially so we can have a vote on them.
Okay, so you want to vote on the
make sure we have a record
A11
of
at this
that.
point?
Yep, so we will, Senator Senjum moves the A11 amendment as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next amendment, Senator Senjum.
Okay, my next amendment is the A5 amendment.
Senator Senjum moves the A5 amendment. And the amendment is in your package. Again, this is an author's amendment to get it into the shape that the author requires. All those in favor of the A5 amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Senator Senjum.
We move on then, Mr. Chair, to the A2 amendment.
Senator Senjum moves the A2 amendment. All those in favor of the A2 amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Senator Senjum.
And then, Mr. Chair, the A6 amendment.
Senator Senjum moves the A6 amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, motion carries.
And lastly, Mr. Chair, from my perspective at least, the A4 amendment.
And Senator Senjum moves the A4 amendment. All those in favor of the A4 amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, motion carries. Senators, when we do take this bill back up, we will have an engrossed copy so that everything is in the shape that we can have a conversation about. I think what's going to happen today is we're going to hear the presentation from Senator Senjum. There's a very lengthy list of testifiers. We want to get through that list and then see if we have any additional time in our time slot to be able to go through the bill for any other questions or comments. Again, it is being laid over, so this is not going on any place at this point in time. Senator Senjum, to your amended 1456 bill.
And again, thanks so much, Mr. Chair and members. I appreciate the hearing on Bill number 1456. And I would just start out by saying, personally for me, it's not just another bill. It's, from my perspective, personally, probably the most important bill of my legislative career from the standpoint of moving Minnesota, in my belief, forward. So I believe renewable energy is our future. Technology will drive it. Environmental concerns for air quality will drive it. Politics will drive it. Cost will drive it. Job creation will drive it. Larger businesses concerned about environmental brand will drive it. And for those concerned about climate change, it will drive it. So I bring this bill forward, Mr. Chair and members. I want Minnesota to be a leader. I often say lead, follow, or get out of the way. Followers never lead, and leaders never follow. I want Minnesota to lead, and that's why I'm bringing this bill forward today. Minnesota has done well since 2007. The Republican-driven, renewable energy standard requiring 28.5% by 2025. We're well on the way of that. Today we're 25%, easily to surpass that 28.5 by 2025. But I first want to emphasize the Clean Energy First bill is not about a bumper sticker, RES 100% by 2050. It's about recognizing that transition to renewable energy is inevitable here, just as it is and is going to be. For instance, China's very active, Europe is very active, and frankly, many of industrial countries are active in this. Many of our states are active. And again, as I said earlier, I want Minnesota to move forward towards a clean energy future. Mr. Chair and members, this bill was introduced last year, actually, to give us some time to incubate, and again this year on February 12th. This bill is about, as I said, a commitment to clean energy with off-ramps available to the utility and the Public Utility Commission to exercise when issues related to cost, reliability, and that means baseload power, line frequency, those kind of things, and distribution preclude the renewable energy option. In other words, unless it meets those the standards, we have off-ramps in here that allow an alternative way, and that's a continuation of non-renewable energy. So it's a planned approach to moving forward, again, given off-ramps when off-ramps are necessary. The bill does not change, by the way, the status of nuclear power in our state. The strength of the bill, I believe, rests in the public utility resource planning process to provide the methodology and framework for intelligent energy advances in Minnesota. Mr. Chairman and members, I recognize change is different and difficult. Change is often frightening. Most of us never are ready for change, but the energy world is changing in front of us. And I believe it's time for Minnesota to move forward into what I call Chapter 2 of its clean energy future. So, Mr. Chair, I've attempted to work with a lot of different folks over the last couple of days in particular to make this bill better. That's evidenced by the amendments we brought forward, and I think to some great extent, and they'll have to speak for themselves, it has been made better. With deeper specifics on the bill, Mr. Chair, I'd like to refer to Mike Bohl, who can take us a little deeper into the bill.
Mr. Bohl, please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Mike Bull. I'm the Policy Director for the Center for Energy and Environment. I'm very thankful for Senator Senjum's leadership on this bill, and I'm here to urge your support of Senate File 1456 as amended. Clean Energy First was born a couple of years ago, as Senator Senjum mentioned, at a lunch, though, that I was having with Beth Soholt from Clean Grid Alliance, who is now gets to tell Peter Mavis what to do, and Paul Austin, who's the Director of Conservation Minnesota. Our conversation was centered around the question, what kind of policies could we consider to move the state forward on accelerated clean energy deployment while not relying on additional utility mandates? As Senator Senjum mentioned, Clean Energy First will help Minnesota accomplish this clean energy transition affordably, reliably, and with increasingly clean electric supply through improvements to utility resource planning, coordinated transmission planning, focused attention on communities that host potentially retiring power plants, and maximized opportunities for high-quality jobs in constructing new electricity generation. Clean Energy First is built around a relatively simple concept that whenever an electric utility needs additional generation, whether because of increased customer demand, power plant retirements, the expiration of power purchase agreements, the utility would look first to clean energy resources like wind, solar, hydropower, energy efficiency, demand response, energy storage, and as an aside, the definition of energy storage in this bill is taken from Senator Osmick's bill from last year that was worked on by a number of folks, and I think we came up with a really good definition. If the utility can satisfy its additional need reliably and affordably through clean energy resources, that's great. That's what should happen. And if it can't, the utility can fill that need through natural gas generation or other alternatives. The only mandate then in this bill is for a utility to show that it's done the analysis in its resource plan, certificate of need, or other proceeding. Over time, this ratcheting effect of looking first to clean energy resources to meet customer electricity needs when it's both reliable and affordable to do so will lead to increasingly clean electric supply for Minnesotans. And as we discussed this concept further over lunch, we realized there were a number of other issues that needed to be addressed. Transmission is one of those. As we go through a clean energy transition, we'll need the utilities to coordinate with the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, who you heard from recently, on planning and implementing changes to the transmission network to support new renewable generation. The language in the bill, as was introduced, had raised a number of concerns from folks, but I think the A4 amendment that you just adopted takes care of those. In addition, we'll need to direct some focused attention, as I mentioned, on the needs of the communities that host large power plants that will eventually be retired and replaced, and the workers that make their living there. CEE is working with utilities and host communities on a project that will help quantify how important these facilities are to those local economies as a start to getting our collective arms around how we might help manage the impacts on those communities. Clean Energy First would also ask the Departments of Commerce, Economic Development, Labor and Industry to focus some attention on this topic. And finally, it's important that local workers benefit from the clean energy transition. Under groundbreaking language negotiated between Peter Mavis of the Clean Grid Alliance and the LIUNA union in the bill, our utilities and the Minnesota PUC would consider local job impacts and give preference to plans and projects that maximize employment and career opportunities for local workers. There are a couple of other important items in the bill. One is a kind of performance incentive for a utility that commits to a clean energy future for its customers in its resource plans. The utility would be allowed to own replacement resources for its retiring power plants upon receiving approval by the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. This provision helps align utilities' interests with the public interest in affordable, reliable, increasingly clean power supply. It's a carrot rather than a stick approach to clean energy deployment. As the bill was initially written, the provision would only apply to Xcel Energy. In, I believe it was the A5 amendment that's been expanded to also include Otter Tail Power and Minnesota Power. In addition, Clean Energy First would provide that if a power plant is to be retired early After evaluation by the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission and a resource plan of all the costs and benefits of that retirement, the utility can recover any outstanding investment in the plant to ensure those costs are not stranded, which would penalize utility shareholders. And finally, Mr. Chair and members, with the leadership of Senator Senjum, we've reached out to and have been working with all interested parties since the bill was introduced to try to work through concerns folks might have. Senator Senjum's collective authors amendments addresses many of those concerns, but I'm sure we'll hear many more today. I'm thankful for the good faith attitude that stakeholders are bringing to the effort to date, and I'm sure we'll want to continue to work through those additional concerns as session moves forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Bull from members? Ms. Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. During the discussions of this bill and moving forward with this plan, was there any discussions as to having carbon capture and storage technology included as one of the methods we look at?
Mr. Bull.
Mr. Chair, Senator Rarick, there is I'm trying to find my bill. There's a provision in the bill that so we specify, the bill would specify what qualifies upfront as a clean energy resource, and those are the ones that I mentioned. It also allows the Public Utilities Commission to add to that list as new technologies, as we have additional technological breakthroughs and costs come down for various options, to add to that list. And carbon capture and sequestration is one of those that I had in mind as I drafted that amendment.
Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But so that currently is not in the bill, but is it something you would be open to?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Bull.
Senator Rarick, yeah, I do believe that we're going to need carbon capture and sequestration to get to high level penetration of carbon-free resources.
Senator Rarick, that may be something we continue to work on as we continue to mark up this bill. It may not be ready for prime time this year even, but certainly I think it's a good start. Further questions for Mr. Bull? Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Either Senator Senjum or Mr. Bull, can you just refresh me, page 6 of the bill, when it's introducing the commission approving a new plan and considering clean energy resources, lines 6.9 and 6.10 describes unless the utility has demonstrated that renewable energy facilities are not in the public interest. Is that what, refresh me again on, is that the PUC making the determination of public interest? Is that the utility in their plan presenting, we believe this is in the public interest or not? I'm just sitting here thinking as I'm reading this language, there can be a wide variety of opinions depending on what your particular slant is. Even members at this table might look at something and one of us will say this is in the best interest, and the person next to him would say, well, I don't believe it is in the public interest. So just refresh me on that process, please.
Mr. Bull.
Mr. Chair, Senator Matthews, that's a great question. It is the responsibility of the Public Utilities Commission under this bill to make that determination, the 5 members of the PUC. But after a very detailed, these resource planning dockets tend to be well populated with advocates and analysis, and so there'll be a full record as to what costs and benefits of the various options are, and it's the role of the commission to make those choices.
Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure that was a part of the public testimony too.
Senator Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to have one question, then I won't, and I'll wait till after the rest of the testifiers are done. But I want to point this out because I think it's important to Senator Rarick's point. Mr. Bull, on page 4 of the bill, on lines 4.20 through 4.27, it incorporates some new terminology into the definitions there. Maybe you could just reference those 3 provisions and how that ties into Senator Rarick's point and what we want to bring in there.
Mr. Bull.
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Simonson, this is where the language that I referenced that the Commission could add to the list of clean energy resources. So as on lines 4.20, 4.21, lists renewable energy, energy storage systems, energy efficiency, and load management as defined terms for clean energy resource, or a carbon-free resource as defined and determined by the Commission under another section. So that's where as we have technology breakthroughs, cost reductions, that carbon capture and sequestration, or potentially other technologies that are not listed here could become added to this list. And because I think, Mr. Chair, members, I think it's important that as we are thinking about the getting to high level penetration for carbon-free resources, we need a broad list of technologies. A broad, we need flexibility in the kinds of technologies, and as well as the milestones for getting to those high level penetration. It's important. That'll help reduce the cost overall if we are able to do that.
Senator Dibble.
Mr. Chair, can I just...
Senator St. James.
Mr. And just maybe to tag on to that, I view this bill as a journey. It's certainly not a 100-yard dash. This may be a 25 to 30-year bill going forward towards the renewable energy goals that there aren't, frankly, any goals in there, but towards a renewable energy future. So it's there's going to be a lot of technological changes during that time. We know that. And so this gives them an opportunity to recognize that and incorporate them.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To either Mr. Bull or Senator Senjum, I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the intent of the language in the A5 amendment, which speaks to utilities' ownership of assets, which reminds me of a conversation we had with Excel at the table with Mr. Evans about solar gardens and this whole conversation about utility ownership, utility scale solar, et cetera, and this question that we're trying to balance about community ownership or non-utility ownership of generation versus utility ownership of generation. Are we still looking to the PUC to make the determination of the public's interest, or are we trying to tilt the field to favor utility ownership? Just what are we accomplishing with the A5 language?
Mr. Bill.
Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, that's another great question. So the way I think we want, as the utilities are committing to this, to high levels of penetration of carbon-free resources, taking down and retiring existing fossil fuel plants, we want them to be financially healthy in that as they move through that. So we only want them to do that if it's also in the public interest, considering customer impacts and benefits. And that's the language, and those are the tests for. It's still up to the Public Utilities Commission to make that decision about whether or not utility ownership is in the public interest, and considering the customer impacts and benefits of ownership versus alternatives.
Senator Dibble.
So I read the language that says, so if retirement of a non-renewable facility occurs in an approved IRP, the utility is entitled to own the generation, transmission, and other facilities necessary to replace the accredited capacity of the retiring facility, and then some conditions set forth. Is the utility not entitled at this point? I mean, isn't there already kind of a public interest test for, Mr. Evans flat out said from the table, let's bid it and see who comes out on top, who's the winner. Yeah. So why the necessity of this language?
Mr. Bull.
Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, The way I think of this language is that it's an emphasis. It's sort of a first dibs. If the utility can show that it's in the public interest, considering the impacts on customers, it should be able to own these facilities. But that has to be, it's still up to the utility, the burden is on the utility to show the Public Utilities Commission that that's the right outcome.
Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry for popping in and out, but back to the issue that I brought up with the carbon capture and technology storage. I actually have an A13 amendment that would add that language into the bill, and I would like to move the A13 amendment.
Senator Rarick moves the A13 amendment. We'll have that distributed. Senator Senjum, do you have an opinion on the A13 amendment?
Mr. Chair, I'm certainly willing to accept that. I happen to have seen a clean coal technology installation in Esteban, Canada, and frankly, it worked fine in terms of clean energy, and it's just a matter then of cost. So other people will make their mind up there, but as far as clean energy, it's certainly an acceptable addition to this.
Discussion from Senator Marty.
Mr. Chair, is there any definition of what carbon capture, I mean, are we talking 100% of the carbon emissions captured? Are we talking one portion of the carbon emissions captured? Because if it's not 100%, even if we ignore the mercury and other issues, it wouldn't be carbon free unless it's 100%.
Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we do not have a definition of carbon capture, but I believe, as Mr. Bull had stated, the technology is coming, and it's something that would be able to be looked at as an option. It's not being mandated, but it would be looked at as an option, and I believe technology is coming that will get us there. So I believe this should be part of the bill to give us that option to look at it.
Senator Marty.
Mr. Chair, but I think there are other issues with inserting this on that language. I think it doesn't just affect what they can look at for defining clean energy. I think it changes it. So I think looking at it at some point when there is something that would be carbon free, but I don't think we should call something carbon free if it's not.
I guess this is still a work in progress bill. I would leave it to Senator Rarick if he wants to, to have the amendment, or if he wants to withdraw it and work on it, because we're not moving this out of committee. It would be your choice, Senator Rarick.
Mr. Chair, I guess the purpose of the amendment was not, and it doesn't say carbon free, it says carbon capture. So at this point, I would still prefer we have a vote on it and see if the committee wants to put it in or not.
Fair enough. Senator Hoffman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Rourke, I think you would look at just the fact of utilizing carbon capture, not necessarily. I don't think Minnesota's topography is one that we can do a direct carbon capture. If I remember having this debate last year, this discussion last year, and I'm familiar with Saskatchewan Power. It's amazing what they're doing on that. I think it's worth looking at how you're going to do it and where you're going to do it. So I don't see that this is mandating or anything. You're just saying that we're going to look at utilizing carbon technology, carbon capture technology, correct?
Senator Rarick?
Mr. Chair, Senator Hoffman, that is, I'm still used to saying Representative.
We'll break you that habit
correct.
sooner or later. Senator Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Senjum, Canada is a big place, and now I'm starting to wonder if we were at the same place, because I visited a small company that's working on carbon capture technology, and it was actually quite fascinating. So I agree with the intent of Senator Rarick to include this, but I also agree with Senator Marty that we probably need a better, cleaner definition of what carbon-free actually means. But as we all know, we're going to lay this over, and I think there's opportunity to work on that definition as we go forward. So I think I would support the amendment with the intention that we work on that definition as we go forward.
I'd just like to point out, council has just sort of pointed me in the direction of what carbon-free resource means. That's on page 4, line 24 through 26. It may need some additional work, but at least there is a placeholder there that Senator Rarick can certainly continue to work on as we move forward. Senator Dibble?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I basically was going to echo what Senator Simonson said, and what Senator Marty said, and what Senator Hoffman said. Basically what the DFLers all said.
It's a big
other than to put an emphasis on the issue that there's more than just carbon that is concerning about the legacy fossil fuel energy generation sector. There's mercury, there's SO2, there's NOx, and other things. So this is a way to, maintain, and give those an advantage in what is, I think that runs contrary to the intent and goals of this bill.
Senator Marty?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think carbon capture is going to be an important technology to be developing. I've seen one facility that does this as well. I think we've got to get a lot further than last year when we had the Lignite Council and somebody else coming in and saying there we have markets for carbon dioxide, and asked them what, and one of the ones they suggested was carbonated beverages. I thought, we're going to drink a lot more carbonated beverages than we have now if they're going to try this. But that was actually a testimony here last year. I think we have a long way to go with this, but my problem is you've got carbon-free resource defined as one that does not contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, and here you are redefining it. Carbon-free resource includes power generation utilizing carbon capture and storage technology, something that utilizes that technology that is not capturing 100% of it is not carbon-free. And I'm not sure that I've seen facilities that are going to get 100%. And again, my point is this is not just for Senator Senjum's purpose of defining clean energy first. There are other consequences of renewable energy here. And so I think this is a definition that's likely contradictory to the one in the bill. I don't think we should be doing this at this time. I mean, obviously, you're right. We're holding the bill over.
Right. Fair enough. And I do want to try to stay within our timeline boundaries, and we have 40 minutes left. So we'll see if the body wants to put this on as an amendment. All those in favor of the 813 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The motion does carry. Let's try and get through the rest of the testifiers. There's a familiar face at the desk. I think he's recovered from working for me, and he can smile again. Mr. Mavis, please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Peter Mavis with Clean Grid Alliance. I'm the Western Regional Policy Manager. We're a nonprofit organization here based in St. Paul. We represent the independent power producers as well as two of the construction firms that build utility-scale wind, solar, and storage projects throughout the country. Our 9-state footprint is in the upper MISO footprint, and I have the 5 states, including Minnesota, the Dakotas, Iowa, and Wisconsin. I'm just going to quickly make a couple of comments on 2 of the provisions in this bill. On the local employment language that's in this bill, we've been working closely with organized labor for a better part of a year. They recognize that as these baseload generators close, that some of their jobs will be lost, and we've been working very hard to come to an agreement on language that's embedded in this bill that starts to provide direction at the Public Utilities Commission to start considering the importance of local jobs and local economic benefits. This is not a mandate. We feel that the Public Utilities Commission has been starting to look at this issue and been struggling a little bit, and so we feel that this language will start providing direction so that they can develop a record as to how these jobs and these economic benefits are in the public interest. And so I'm very proud to say that we worked very, very hard to get to this point, and look forward to continuing to work with labor as we move forward on a clean energy economy. The other piece I just wanted to focus on was the transmission planning. As Mr. Bull summarized it well, as we diversify our generation mix and these centralized baseload generators close, Transmission is going to be very important to ensure that these clean energy resources can get into the system. And similar to the work that they did on the CapEx 2020 project, what we're trying to do in this bill, and it's by directing MISO, and they're already looking at doing this work, is to have a coordinated effort to start studying where we're going to build out the transmission system so that these new resources can be added appropriately. Currently, the system up here in the upper Midwest, because the wind resource is so rich that the developers it's becoming more and more difficult to interconnect with the bulk transmission system. For instance, where you may have had 3, 4, 5, 6 mile small 115 kVW transmission lines to tie in, that the independent power producers are now having to build the big 345K lines up to 25 and 30 miles away to hook into the bulk system. So transmission planning is complex, it's expensive, but we're hoping that we can get moving forward on this so that the next round of MISO multi-value projects, or maybe another CapEx round, will be in the future to help with this transition. So those are my 2 points, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you, Mr. Mavis. Next, Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mavis, yeah, I agree. I think this A4 amendment is very important part of the transmission study. But I just had one question. I appreciate your work with unions on the local job stuff. And I know there are at least 2 bills I'm aware of that are going by clean energy first, and I assume they've been some places coordinated and other places they diverge and so on. But the other bill also has some labor protection types of things. Do you know what the differences are? I mean, both of them have some support among labor and so on, or?
Mr. Mavis.
Mr. Chair, Senator Marty, yeah, so this bill is, this language is consideration language. There's some other language that is in the governor's bill that provides that the commission may require prevailing wage, and it's embedded in the site permit for large wind energy facilities. We've been working closely with organized labor on that particular provision, and organized labor knows that the independent power producers, that we oppose that provision, but we continue to have open dialogue to find solutions that everybody can agree with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important. I'm glad work is being done on trying to include that. So.
Next on the testifiers list, Adam Seidel and Paul Austin. Mr. Seidel, please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, my name is Adam Seidel, Executive Director of the Minnesota Conservative Energy Forum. I'll try and cut this down a little bit because I know we got a long list. MnSEF promotes and educates on opportunities to modernize our Minnesota energy economy and advance clean technology under American principles like free and competitive markets, American innovation, national security, and property rights. Senate File 1456 is a good step forward for clean energy adoption in Minnesota under these principles, and MnSEF is happy to say we support the bill. We would like to thank Senator Senjum and his leadership in taking these needed steps through creative, conservative policy. Minnesotans have made clear that they desire more market adoption of clean energy and renewable options in our economy. And what's more, advancements in renewable technologies combined with Minnesota's geography and weather patterns have led to an environment where renewables successfully compete with old forms of energy generation in the marketplace. Wind, solar, and other renewables combined with our abundant supplies of domestic American natural gas are often smoking the competition when it comes to price. Alongside these and other advantages of renewables, it's no surprise that there is a huge and growing customer demand in the marketplace to purchase renewable energy products. With our current heavily regulated monopoly system, customers don't have the choice to shop around, so it's important that we utilize policy goals in order to ensure that we can meet these customer demands for renewable products on the marketplace. Of course, one of the ways that folks seek to do this is through big mandates. This bill takes a more conservative, market-oriented approach by just expanding our state's current preferences for renewables, that's through the IRP process, and expanding that to a greater number of PUC decisions. In short, this legislation will help guarantee customers of all sizes have access to the products that they want to buy. All this is accomplished alongside very reasonable off-ramps and price and reliability controls that will keep our economy competitive and speed the adoption of renewables in a responsible way. This bill provisions also reinforce the Jobs for Minnesota Workers provisions, which is a win for Minnesota workers. Earlier this week, the Business Council for Sustainable Energy released their Minnesota fact sheet that showed 59,000 Minnesotans are currently working in energy efficiency and clean energy generation. This industry is a boon for Minnesota workers, especially in rural communities across greater Minnesota, and is providing a big boost to the Minnesota farm economy. This bill's language to build Minnesota first using Minnesota workers will further expand these economic opportunities across greater Minnesota. And again, we'd like to thank Senator Senjum for this important legislation, and we encourage the members of the committee to support it.
Thank you, Mr. Seidel. Thank you for your testimony. Just a reminder, we still have a lengthy list of testifiers, and we have a time frame before another committee meets in here. So if the testifiers can be as succinct as they can be, we would appreciate that. Mr. Austin, welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Okay. My name is Paul Austin. I'm the Executive Director of Conservation Minnesota, which is a statewide conservation organization with a growing network of over 80,000 Minnesotans, more than half of whom live in greater Minnesota. I'm here today to speak in favor of Senate File 1456, Clean Energy First Act. I want to start by thanking Senator Senjum for his leadership in putting this important legislation forward both this year and last year. There are several reasons Clean Energy First makes sense for Minnesota as a strategy to reduce carbon pollution and build on our growing clean energy economy. If passed, the Clean Energy First Act would be Minnesota's biggest legislative step forward for clean energy and carbon reduction in over a decade. Central to this legislation is a rock-solid commitment to providing both reliable and affordable energy. The policy will drive us continually forward toward clean energy as older power plants are retired and replaced, capturing cost savings, technological gains, and pollution reductions for customers. The Clean Energy First Act is designed to achieve these goals while providing the flexibility for utilities of every size to succeed. Finally, Clean Energy First begins the critical work of ensuring that communities that currently host power plants have the tools to create a bright economic future. This is a common sense approach that will put Minnesota on a path to clean energy. That's why I'm excited to continue our work with you, the administration, Senator Senjum, and our bipartisan partners in labor, utilities, business, nonprofits, and the legislature to make sure we get started this year. I appreciate your time, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. Mr. Zart, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Shane Zart with Flaherty and Hood and represent the Coalition of Utility Cities. And the Coalition Utility Cities is a group of 8 cities in Minnesota that host the state's largest investor-owned power plants, including cities like Becker, Oak Park Heights, Monticello, Red Wing, and others. And on behalf of our members, I'm here to testify today to thank Senator Senjum for the inclusion of language that recognizes the impacts that eventual plant retirements will have on host communities and recognizing the state's role in assisting in that transition. Because hosting these facilities has large local impacts, including increased public safety costs, increased infrastructure costs that are borne by local governments, and land use challenges. And likewise, retirement of these plants will have major impacts. Every one of these host communities has communicated to me that the message they'd like to deliver today is that they don't want to stand in the way of these transitions. They want to be partners in it. But being partners will require the state and other stakeholders to engage and account for those host community impacts. And just to put some scale to it, by way of example, the city of Red Wing, which hosts the Prairie Island Nuclear Facility, recently did some analysis, and 2 of the largest taxpayers, individual taxpayers in their jurisdiction is the Prairie Island plant, also the Target store in town. But to compare the two to one another and get a sense for the scale of the transition they're facing, it would take over 153 of those Target stores to equal the tax capacity that's contributed to the community by the plant. So the language that's included in here, recognizing host community needs, is a good start. I'll also point to another bill that was introduced by Senator Housley, Senator Matthews, and others that represent host communities. Senate File 1888, which would create a grant program for those communities for economic development purposes as they look to develop a new post-plant future for themselves. So we look forward to continuing to work on this, work with the committee and other stakeholders, and urge the committee to continue to consider host community impacts and provide the agencies tasked with that work with adequate resources to provide that support. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zark. Next on the agenda is Joseph Pereira, Citizens Utility Board, and then we have the Labor's International Union and Iron Workers. Not sending Annie in front of my committee? You must be holding her back for the big guns. Is that what you're doing? Please introduce yourself for the
start
committee.
Start with small arms.
And begin your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having us today. We're here to provide general support for Senate File 1456. We have some concerns, but generally would say, and I agree with Senator Senjum fully, that the strength of this bill is really around the commission process and, allowing the subtleties that happen there and the conversations that happen there to lead this transition. We do have a few concerns relative to the bill, and specifically their provisions that we see as maybe going against this philosophy of the commission having the say. In particular, I'd point you to lines 2.1 through 2.5. This is a section which requires the commission to order cost recovery on the positive value of terminated assets regardless of reason. This section strikes a previous provision which said there could be cost recovery based on state or federal policy. We believe that as the language sits today, that the definition or what could be included for cost recovery is too broad, and also the word must directs the commission and doesn't give them flexibility in how they could deal with those assets. You can imagine a non-economic resource being included in the resource plan from the utility that has nothing to do with this actual Clean Energy First Act included, and then utilities getting cost recovery on that. We'd see that too broad and would ask for discretion at the commission to address that issue. The other area I would point you to is lines 7.8 through 7.25, and this has been touched on a bit. We are concerned that that the language shifts the burden or the burden away from utilities proving that ownership of assets is in the public interest and maybe pushes that a bit further. We have heard testimony today that that indeed it is the utility's burden to prove public interest in ownership, and we would like the record and legislative intent to continue to reflect that. To quickly move to Amendment 2 that has been adopted, CUB opposes this amendment. CUB's firm in its position that the appropriate place to do resource planning, rate making, and cost allocation is at the commission. We believe this amendment is too directive and could possibly shift costs from industrial and commercial consumers toward residential consumers. So we'd ask the committee to take that up. Amendment 5 as well, similar to what I laid out, the language which includes ownership is still within Amendment 5, and so we would still like that to be considered. And then I'd also like to bring up our opposition to Amendment 6. Of course, CUB would like more than anything to support Amendment 6, which is to cap retail retail cost rises at or around inflation. We think we would be a bit hypocritical, though, if we supported this bill and then also this amendment and then also opposed that caps for commercial and industrial. So we would ask again that the commission be the ones to address these cost allocations and rate making as opposed to what is laid out in the bill. All that being said, we are supportive of the bill. We do think that this is a strong pathway to get to the goals of decarbonization and feel like the right mechanisms are in place to protect consumer interest. We applaud Senator Senjum for bringing this forward and look forward to working with him and this committee to move this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Bull, did you come up for a specific comment or something very brief, because we're down to 25 minutes?
I think it was just for these questions. So.
Yeah.
Mr. Bull?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I just wanted to touch on the one question that Mr. Pereira raised about the commission oversight over stranded costs. My sense, the way we've drafted this, the stranded costs would be considered as part of the costs of a resource plan. And so it would be included with all the other costs and benefits of the resource plan. And if the commission decided that retiring a power plant early made sense for customers in the public interest, it's only then that the stranded costs would be recoverable.
Okay, very good. Would representatives of the Labor's International Union and Iron Workers come to the podium? I do not have your names, so if you would sign the paper there just with your name after you've done your testimony, because we just don't have it written down. So, sir, if you would state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Yes, sir. Thank you. My name is Kevin Pranis, and I'm here today on behalf of LIUNA, Minnesota and North Dakota, a union of more than 12,000 proud men and women who build and maintain our state's transportation, water, energy, and building infrastructure. And I want to thank the chair and committee for a chance to express our support for Senate File 1456. Our members know a little bit about energy. For decades, we've worked alongside building trades brothers and sisters to construct and safely maintain Minnesota's fleet of conventional and nuclear power plants, and a growing number are employed in wind and solar. We also build and maintain gas and oil pipelines, including Line 3, and distribution lines, and we work in refineries. Minnesota is a national leader when it comes to electric power, with electric rates that are below the national average and great scores in terms of efficiency and reliability. Our success is founded in strong utility regulation and partnerships with the investor-owned utilities such as Xcel and Minnesota Power, as well as the municipal utilities and co-ops. It also depends on a skilled workforce that has kept the system reliable and affordable while providing middle-class paychecks, comprehensive health coverage, retirement security to thousands of families across Minnesota. When we look at energy policy, particularly a clean energy policy, our test is it achievable based on what we know about demand, resources, and technology? Does it provide flexibility to utilities and other stakeholders to pursue strategies that work with local resources and needs? Does it include safeguards to protect residential and business ratepayers and ensure reliability? And does it expand opportunity for Minnesota workers, businesses, and communities? In our view, this bill passes that test, all four of those questions. In particular, we are focused on economic opportunity. We see clean infrastructure projects as a huge opportunity for Minnesota communities, especially outside the cities where there's enough land to build utility-scale wind and solar installations, and that means a giant win for greater Minnesota for those communities and those workers, as long as those local workers get the chance to build those projects. And so we support that continued development. And the vision that we see for this, construction jobs are obviously critically important to us, but this is more than just construction jobs in the areas where wind and solar are built. We have iron mines that provided northern Minnesota workers, including many of our members, employment for many generations, and building wind drives demand for that steel. We have wind resources that will create economic development across southern Minnesota that help with jobs, lease, and tax revenues. Finally, we have demand for electric vehicles and battery storage that will drive, for our purposes, demand for copper and nickel, which will help keep mining going in northern Minnesota for many years to come. So we see this as an economic development engine for the entire state and for our members across the entire state. We think that the work that we've done with Clean Grid, we want to appreciate the efforts industry has made to work with us on a win-win solution that ensures that as we develop these resources, we're putting local people to work in the host communities and helping with the transition for our members and the communities where they live around existing conventional power plants. And the last point I would make is we regard the utility ownership as a critical part of Minnesota's success to date, and we think the purpose of this is to make clear that the goal of clean energy is not to shrink utilities and their assets, but to make sure that those move toward clean energy and that we get all the benefits that are related to that. So that's critically important to our success, and we appreciate that it's there, and we think the test that the Public Utility Commission will impose is entirely fair and will protect the public interest as this goes forward.
Thank you, sir. Sir, will you state your name and your affiliation for the record and begin your testimony?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak on the proposed clean energy legislation. My name is Nate O'Reilly, and I'm with Ironworkers Local 512, which represents over 8,000 members, retirees, and their families all throughout Minnesota. Ironworkers perform work on new construction, maintenance, remodel of transportation, commercial, and industrial facilities and systems, including hundreds of thousands of work hours annually in power generation and energy-related projects. Ironworkers 512 support this proposed legislation, provided it maintains language ensuring majority local hiring standards that we currently have with traditional power generation projects in the past. I speak about this knowing firsthand from growing up on a dairy farm in a small community in southeast Minnesota that there are limited opportunities for someone like myself to enter a career that pays family-supporting wages along with health and retirement benefits. Additionally, we have seen a decline in the number of these good job opportunities in the smaller communities throughout greater Minnesota. Ensuring majority local workers on new clean energy production will help ensure people like me have a fair shot at these jobs, and the communities where the projects happen to be remain strong and vibrant. We believe local hire standards are important to be included because, unfortunately, all too often, and particularly over the recent years, we have seen large green or alternative energy generation projects performed by mostly out-of-state workers. When non-Minnesota workers are utilized, not only do local workers miss out on the opportunity to work on these projects, communities and the state as a whole miss out on realizing the full economic potential these projects can provide. When Minnesota workers are utilized, we know that those wages and benefits are used to buy homes and pay property tax, support local school districts, faith and community organizations. They shop and purchase goods and services that support local and small businesses. They utilize their health care benefits at area hospitals, clinics, and other wellness providers. The income and taxes and other payroll holdings will stay here in the Minnesota. Minnesota and local communities will miss out on most, if not all, of these economic benefits when out-of-state workers are utilized. I know it's short on time here, and you guys want to move on, but I have just one last statement. There are currently several $1 billion of permitted and proposed projects in the clean energy sphere in Minnesota, mostly in greater Minnesota. The building we're here in today, the Capitol across the street, U.S. Bank stadiums, are just a few of the recent years' metro area projects that ensured such local worker protections. It just seems like common sense to me, similar protections on projects of similar or greater impact to workers and job opportunities all throughout, particularly greater Minnesota, should be maintained. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for listening to the important aspects of maintaining majority local worker inclusion as we transition to clean energy production in the future. Thank you.
Next on the testifiers list is Lauren Lautug from Otter Tail Power and Thor Underdahl, Minnesota Power.
I live just north of Rochester. Good. Perfect.
Please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Lauren Lautug with Otter Tail Power in Fergus Falls. And just by way of reminder, half of our customers reside in Minnesota and half of our customers reside in North and South Dakota. I'd like to thank Senator Senjum and the stakeholders we've been working with since November or December of last year on this bill, and we have seen some very positive changes to the bill. On page 2, line 3, we had a problem with the language that was identified by an earlier testifier. The current statute allows for if a facility is closed as a result of a specific state or federal energy statute or policy, then the commission may. The new bill would say just as a part of a resource planning order, we need both of these conditions to be true. The bill states that the commission must allow us to recover any net positive book value, but the commissions in North Dakota and South Dakota have no such allowance. The A11 amendment that has been offered by Senator Senjum fixes this concern that we have. Page 7, lines 8 to 18 have been discussed by previous testifiers. Paragraphs F1 and 2 Initially, there was no accommodation for a utility own a replacement facility if it can't supply at least 85% of its resources from non-greenhouse gas emitting facilities. Otter Tail has no nuclear facilities. Otter Tail has no large hydro facilities. And so we believe that we could achieve 65% by the year 2035. And so the A5 amendment covers that concern of ours. So again, we'd like to thank the author for that. A third issue we had was regarding transmission planning on pages 8 through 10. We had a transmission planning group that met regularly over the last 4 or 5 weeks, and they came up with new language that was worked together with Center for Energy and Environment, Mr. Bull's organization, and the Clean Grid Alliance. And the language that's in, I believe it's the A4 amendment, represents the result of those discussions. Finally, for Otter Tail, there's one provision that's missing. To the degree that resource planning changes would, in fact, cause early closure of a fossil facility in either North Dakota or South Dakota, Otter Tail needs language to ensure that we would be allowed to collect the marginal costs for such an action from our Minnesota ratepayers. The North Dakota and South Dakota utility commissions don't agree that North Dakota and South Dakota ratepayers should pay for Minnesota mandates. Minnesota uses what's called a public interest standard. North Dakota and South Dakota use a least cost standard. So in conclusion, we appreciate the efforts that have been made by Senator Senjum and by Center for Energy and Efficiency and the Clean Grid Alliance to make this bill work. We feel we've got a little more work to do on one piece of it. Thank you, members of the committee. I'll answer any questions if you got any.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Lautag. Mr. Underdahl, please state your name for the record. Begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thor Underdahl with Minnesota Power. We're an investor-owned utility out of Duluth, Minnesota that serves 145,000 residential customers with 60% of our load coming from some of the largest, most energy-intensive users in the state. Again, I would maybe echo my colleague, Mr. Lautag. We do appreciate Senator Senjum bringing this forward, an important discussion. We've been having it in the House, and we're just at that point in the energy transition. So important to have these discussions. We've been working with stakeholders to discuss this bill and trying to bring up some uniquely specific items of concern to us. Obviously, we want to support the transition moving forward, but we have a very unique circumstance in that our customer base is almost wholly focused on large power customers that are incredibly energy intensive. Excuse me, up to 20% of their energy cost, their input costs can come from energy, and that's a big deal. So every cent we're talking about really matters, and that matters to all of our ratepayers, not just them. If we lose a mine, if we lose a paper mill, then everyone else, the denominator becomes smaller, and everyone else gets hurt. So we do support the effort going forward and continuing the discussion on this. We think this bill has good elements. It obviously gets complicated when you're working with a wide variety of stakeholders and people have varying opinions on what decision should be made here and what decision should be made at the PUC, and that's very understandable. We do appreciate the elements that were put in to put some consideration towards costs for the large industrial and commercial class of customers, and we think we can continue to work on that and further those efforts. So we look forward to the discussion. This is being laid over, so I assume there'll be further discussions offline and maybe into the following session, but we appreciate the efforts to date. Thank you.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to apologize with deadline week, we're kind of bouncing in and out, but I wanted to ask Mr. Lautag or Mr. Underdahl. Senator Dibble had asked about ownership, should we be concerned that the commission is allowing utilities to own more of their capital projects?
Okay.
I'll go ahead.
Mr. Lautag.
Mr. Chair, Senator Pratt, Senator Dibble, should utilities own their facilities? My company believes the answer is yes, and I'll just give you one example of why we believe that. We in North Dakota, we own 3 wind farms and we rent 2. We're about to build another owned wind farm. Improvements have been made over the last 5 years in terms of operational characteristics of running wind turbines. I'll just give you an example. Wind vibration monitoring equipment can be installed so that you can predict ahead of time when you've got issues with bearings, for example. So you can predict when you're going to have to do maintenance and replace bearings. We've got 100% of our owned turbines have wind vibration monitoring equipment attached to them.
In our rented wind farms, 0%. On our own wind farms, we have an oil. AMSOIL makes a synthetic oil just for wind turbines. We've had this installed for 5 years now. It extends the life of a facility like a wind turbine. And we've had this installed for 5 years. Our rented wind turbines won't have that until next year sometime. So I think I'm just giving you an example of if you own, you care, and you take care of it for the long run on behalf of all your ratepayers.
Mr. Underdahl?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Pratt. That's a fair question. I think one element I would lay out is if this language didn't have 1.16 and 1.17, each public utility demonstrates its ownership of replacement resources in the public interest, considering customer impacts and benefits, then I would share that same concern that there isn't a weighting there and not an opportunity for interveners and come and make this point that qualification isn't being met. And then I'd also just point to decisions like that having been made in some sense. I look at the Metropolitan Emissions Reduction Program, or MERP, which I know Senator Marty was here around for, and that allowed for plans to be brought forward, and if the plans were approved and deemed in the interest in meeting the qualifications of that statute, then cost recovery and a return on that investment was allowed. So there's some past precedent for doing that. Like I said, we could have varying opinions on whether that was right either or not. So I think that's a fair discussion for this committee.
Next on the testifiers list is Rick Evans from Xcel Energy and Andrew Maratska, Large Industrials.
Okay.
Mr. Evans, please state your name for the record. Begin your testimony.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Rick Evans with Xcel Energy. I have a set of handouts here. I'm not going to refer to them in my testimony, so it's not urgent, but some information for the committee, and I think we've got some copies in the back for the public as well. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'll cut it as short and sweet as I can. Last December, our CEO, Ben Folk, put the company on the course to achieve 80% carbon reduction by 2030 and 100% carbon-free by 2050. That commitment applies not only to Minnesota, but to the customers that we serve in North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Colorado, Texas, and New Mexico. So, pardon me. Thanks. So this is a significant undertaking. It is a massive undertaking. It is a very complex undertaking. And we believe that public utilities like Xcel Energy operating under the supervision of the Public Utilities Commissions in those various states are uniquely situated to achieve these goals faster, more economically, and more reliably than anyone else can. This is already demonstrated. Since 2005, Xcel Energy has reduced carbon emissions twice as much as Germany, which is often held out as a world leader in carbon reduction. We believe the Minnesota law already gives the public utilities and the PUC all of the authority that is needed to achieve these goals, but we also thank Senator Senjum for bringing forward ways to change the regulatory statutes so that we can do this faster, better, and more carefully. We do agree with other sentiments that have been expressed here that we need to continue to work on that. I think the number of amendments that have been proposed today is evidence of that, and we look forward to that. Two quick references to what's already been talked about. First of all, to answer Senator Pratt's questions, Minnesota law, Minnesota statutes set public utilities earnings as a percentage of assets. To make a change in law that says, oh, by the way, we're not going to let you own any assets, at the very time that you're asking us to shut down assets that don't meet the clean energy standards that are being set forth, is fundamentally unfair. So I would disagree slightly with Mr. Bull. This is not an incentive. This is keeping the regulatory compact intact, which has brought us to, I think, a very good position in Minnesota and will continue to put us in a very good position. The other question I do want to address is Senator Dibbles, because it's a very, very good question. I'm not going to rehash the whole Solar Garden argument, but that debate was about how we charge customers for this energy. And the Solar Garden energy is at a fixed price that is unrelated to cost. I mentioned there were two ways that we traditionally in Minnesota have dealt with how to charge customers. One of them, which is traditional in purchase power, is public bidding, which is what we recommended for the Community Solar Gardens program. But the other is the Minnesota rate case process, We don't get to change our rates with our customers until we have provided extensive financial detailed information to the Public Utilities Commission, allowed over a year of public hearings and public comment, and everybody gets to come in and examine that, and then a commission appointed by the governor gets to decide how much we get to charge our customers. We would be happy to have community solar garden developers go through that process if that's what they want, but we have a feeling they would prefer going through a public bidding process. I'd be happy to answer questions, though I know you don't have any time for them, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Seeing no questions, we'll keep moving along. Mr. Maratska, please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andrew Maratska from the law firm Stoll Reeves, here today on behalf of large industrial ratepayers in the state of Minnesota. These ratepayers are the largest electric and natural gas consumers in the state and include taconite mines, paper and pulp mills, refineries, steel mills, and other large industrial customers. They compete locally and globally to sell their product. Energy is a significant component of each of these companies' overall cost structure, ranging from 20% to 30% of the overall cost of production. A 1 cent, that is 1 penny, increase to the cost of electric energy equates to over $70 million of cost increases for this group as a whole. They therefore have significant reservations for any legislation that could increase electric rates, which is why I'm here. Make no mistake, this is not a light touch statute or bill. It significantly modifies resource planning, accelerates retirement of fossil fuel generation, and mandates new cost recovery. To be clear, the industrial customers are not pro-emissions or anti-renewables. Indeed, many have their own sustainability goals. As a state, we have strong environmental controls and energy supply that is increasingly clean, which means the products ultimately produced here are largely done in a more environmentally friendly way than other areas of the world. Taking any action that could put the operations of those industrial customers in jeopardy through uncontrolled power cost increases or otherwise is not sound public policy. The large industrial's concern on cost is rooted in past experience. Over the past dozen or so years, large industrial customers have not fared well in terms of utility rate increases, as the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission worked through implementation of prior legislative directives on energy policy. Since 2007, rates have increased for many large industrial customers by over 50%, and in some instances, over 60%. As a result, rates in Minnesota for large industrial customers have gone from well below the national average to above the national average. These increases and this competitive disadvantage is not sustainable. The Minnesota Public Utilities Commission has done little to address these concerns. Your role as the legislature is to tell the Commission what to do and how to do it. To the extent Senate File 1456 can be amended to address these concerns by providing the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission with guidance in terms of both rate setting and resource planning, and doing more to ensure competitive electric rates, large industrial customers would likely support those amendments. We firmly believe that the fundamental tenets of any significant new energy policy must include cost control, competitive rates, and reliability. The large industrial customers greatly appreciate the opportunity to voice our concerns today, provide perspective, and offer some conceptual solutions. We hope to continue the discussions as this is laid over.
Thank you, Mr. Maratska. Representative Pepin, welcome to the clean, fresh air of the Senate. Please state your name for the
well, that's awkward.
For the record and begin your testimony.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Energy Committee. I'm Joyce Pepin, and contrary to popular belief, I'm actually here on behalf of the Minnesota Rural Electric Association and the electric co-ops we serve throughout the state. And it is an honor to finally, after all these years, make it to the Senate, the upper chamber, to testify. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify on behalf of Senate File 1456. First of all, thank you to the author of the bill for all the work being done to improve the bill to make it more workable for everyone. We truly appreciate those efforts and wish to offer our help to accomplish that end. We at MRA believe greening the grid is a laudable goal, but the existing PUC review process already provides a good balance. Minnesota's electric cooperatives have demonstrated their commitment to envision this bill for clean energy, as evidenced by the swift increase in their renewable energy mix. We understand this bill would further solidify that preference and appreciate the author's willingness to continue to work on balancing that goal with not making the IRP process, which is advisor only for G&T cooperatives, any more costly and time-consuming than necessary. To that end, we really appreciate the committee's willingness to delete Section 12, an onerous section that would have imposed additional mandates for existing resources in Minnesota and other states. Additionally, we appreciate the comments from Senator Rarick, I'm living in the past, Senator Rarick and Senator Simonson, and the adoption of the A13 amendment. We believe carbon capture and sequestration is a vitally important option to retain reliability by providing a path forward for the critical role baseload generation has long played while still embracing a clean energy future. Quickly, one example of such technology is Project Tundra, spearheaded by North Dakota-based Minkota Power Cooperative. The technology could capture up to 95% of CO2 emissions from the coal-based Milton Young station, transport them by pipeline, and utilize them for enhanced oil recovery and/or permanent geologic storage. Thank you for the amendment and additionally to specify including such projects within the definition of clean energy resources is really appreciated. In sum, while it needs further work, we do acknowledge the Clean Energy First proposal charts a measured and orderly transition to higher levels of renewable energy through the planning process over time, as old resources are retired and new resources are added. This is a better approach than arbitrarily setting dates by which utilities must add specific amounts of renewable generation to their portfolios, regardless of need or their impact on grid stability. Still, for the reasons outlined earlier, we respectfully ask you consider laying the bill over, not just for session, but during over the interim so that there's time for additional stakeholder meetings and additional vetting through the process. Once again, thank you for having me and for the honor of testifying in front of the Senate.
Thank you, Ms. Pepin. Last two testifiers on the list are Lauren Schotthorst from the Minnesota Chamber and Kelsey Johnson, Iron Mining Association. Ms. Schotthorst, please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lauren Schotthorst, and I serve as the Energy Policy Director for the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, representing 2,300 employers of every size and over 500,000 employees in every industry across the state. A few days ago, I had the opportunity to share with this committee the position of our members regarding the state's approach to energy policy, so I'll be brief with regard to my comments in opposition to the Clean Energy First Act, as the sentiments are similar. First, the scope of the legislation is actually enormous. As the legislature contemplates various pieces of legislation that fundamentally change the way our state makes, distributes, and uses energy, our members ask that the state prioritizes the principles of reliability, affordability, and cost competitiveness. We hear a lot about the cost of inaction during these debates, but there's a cost of action too. Our members do not feel that enough attention has been paid to what these changes will actually mean for and what these changes will actually cost Minnesota's ratepayers, our job creators, and the economy. It's a fair concern, and we share those sentiments with the committee today to caution that the cost of unintended consequences is real, and we believe that the legislature should deliberate carefully. Whatever direction we go in, we want to make sure we get it right. With regard to the Chamber's energy policy priority, our members want reliable, cost-effective power at competitive prices. We know that you're familiar with this and share this vision, Mr. Chair, and appreciated the time that you spent with our Energy Policy Committee at the beginning of the session to lay this groundwork. The rising trend of Minnesota's commercial and industrial electrical rates over the past decade, faster than U.S. average and inflation, is a serious concern. That is why our members support strategies that consider all of the energy resources available, as long as those strategies result in cost-effective power, competitive rates, ensure energy system reliability, and do not shift costs to others. Preferences and mandates set by government have seldom demonstrated to be cost-effective, solvent, or sustainable solutions. In fact, this very committee is reconsidering some of those policy initiatives. We are also concerned by the testimony we heard from MISO in February regarding the integration complexity and grid impacts emerging from the Renewable Integration Impact Assessment. While we appreciate that the stated intent is to be more of a lighter approach, we do not see this goal being achieved in reality. The bill adds to an already lengthy and complicated process, the costs of which will be passed on to all utility ratepayers through new and existing cost recovery mechanisms. As I stated in the beginning, as stakeholders, our members have significant concerns and questions about the proposal and do not support its passage at this time. But we know with that comes the responsibility to keep working with other interested parties and policymakers to find the right approach, and we're committed to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to reiterate our perspective with your committee today.
Ms. Johnson, please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Kelsey Johnson. I'm president of the Iron Mining Association of Minnesota. Our association represents the 6 operating taconite facilities, 2 idled pig iron facilities, and 200 vendor member businesses in Minnesota. The iron mines directly and indirectly employ 16,000 hardworking men and women, and these are high-paying, very highly skilled jobs. Environmental stewardship is a core value of Minnesota's iron mines, and the iron mines have made significant changes to their processes and facilities to honor their agreement with the state and the communities where they operate. Minnesota's iron mines provide 85% of the nation's iron, which is used to make the steel that makes the things that we use every day. For example, building a wind turbine requires between 200 and 400 tons of steel. As a strategic partner, the iron mines would like to continue to provide the nation with the iron it needs to make the steel for the green revolution of the future. Since 2007, electric energy rates have risen 60% for our industry. This cost accounts for 25 to 30% of the cost of production. During the polar vortex, our energy system showed its inflexibility to handle the energy load demands. Mines were asked to reduce their energy load, something rarely requested and before that time used only during summer months. Our current energy system raises serious questions about reliability. As Minnesota embarks on a green energy revolution, 2 things must be acknowledged. First, that revolution can't happen without raw materials like Minnesota iron to build the infrastructure. And second, a green energy revolution can't be truly green if it's built with raw materials mined in nations without environmental regulations. In order to ensure this green energy revolution is built with responsibly sourced infrastructure, we should do everything we possibly can to make sure that these mines are operational. The Iron Mining Association cannot support in its current form, but hopes to work with other stakeholders and the author to address these emerging concerns.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Just members, FYI, the Ag Policy Committee is not meeting today, so we do have the pressure's off, but I think we still want to get out of here probably 3 o'clock-ish. We all have other committee meetings we have to get to, so at least we can bump up to 3 o'clock and not have a problem. Thank you both for your testimony. One addition to our testifiers list, Jason Flores, American for Prosperity, and then if there is anyone else in the audience that is not on the testifiers list that would like to testify for or against this bill, please step up to the podium so we can have you heard during this time period. Mr. Flores, please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Jason Flores. I'm the State Director for Americans for Prosperity here in Minnesota. It's on behalf of our activists across the state that I'm here today to voice opposition to this Senate file, which would hurt consumers by disregarding market signals and allowing government agencies instead to pick winners and losers within power markets and among various energy technologies. In the end, these policies are judged by their results, not by their intentions. After over a decade under the current renewable energy standard, the evidence is clear. Government interference of this kind in energy markets is simply too expensive to the tune of $1 billion more that Minnesota consumers are paying per year for their energy than based on our historical price competitiveness. Minnesotans will be worse off under this plan as energy costs skyrocket and jobs will be lost as businesses look to states with more affordable energy prices to set up shop and expand. Now, all Minnesotans care about our environment and want to protect it. And thankfully, the state has better options at our disposal than ineffective command and control style government intervention. As the pace of technological change accelerates and the creative destruction of competition pushes less efficient technologies out of the market, we can realize our environmental protection goals, but without that same cost to Minnesota's economy. Over the past decade, U.S. power markets have undergone fundamental changes. According to Professor David Victor from the University of California in San Diego, the impact just of the switch from coal to natural gas on U.S. emissions each year was, quote, equal to about twice the total effect of the Kyoto Protocol on carbon emissions in the rest of the world, including in the European Union. In other words, embracing the free market and unleashing our entrepreneurs in competition toward developing new technology has proven far more effective at improving our environment and protecting ratepayers than any strong-armed mandate, regulation, or goal. Instead of putting government squarely in the path of innovation, policymakers should instead focus on allowing electricity providers to follow market signals and secure the cheapest and most reliable energy mix based on consumers' demand. Mr. Chair, members, thank you for the time to testify in front of the committee here today.
Thank you, Mr. Flores. Seeing no additional people stampeding towards the testifier's chair, Commissioner Lipschultz, would you like to? Probably not. I did spy you in the audience. Members, any additional commentary? I think Senator Simonson, you had some paper in front of you. Senator Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Senjum, for bringing the bill forward. I think it's you've done a lot of work over the last several hours, I know, to pull this thing together, and I think that's evident by the amount of support that you have amongst many stakeholders. And I think about our next step in this energy movement, if you will. I think that this bill is probably the framework of what that step is. And you've done a lot of work already, but I think that there are some other things that we can do to make it even better. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would offer the A8 amendment.
Senator Simonson moves the 8-8 amendment.
And Mr. Chair and members,
Senator Simonson.
These should have been distributed while we were talking. I was trying to save some time there, so it should be in front of you. And the series of amendments that I want to talk about is really kind of about the flip side of this discussion. I think it's widely understood in Minnesota and amongst many of the stakeholders in this room and across many facets of our economy that we need to move in a direction that reduces our carbon emissions. So this conversation is part of that discussion. There are many other facets to that conversation, but as we talk about energy production, one of the things, perhaps the only thing that I agree with from the last testifier was that as we do this, there's going to be a cost to the ratepayer. And we have to recognize that, and I think we are. But I think that we have to recognize it in such a way that we don't put our economy into a tailspin and that we don't reduce the number of jobs that we already have out there that are really important to our economy. And I would just speak strictly on behalf of Northern Minnesota, where we have a lot of these high-paying, good jobs, supporting families, good benefits, and are directly related to the success of our economy. So the A8 amendment really talks about one specific thing, and I'll just go through a couple of points that I want to make. Our laws here in Minnesota that we in the legislature create and the regulation of the public utilities by the PUC under those laws are really premised on cost of service. The Public Utilities Commission, by a statute, is a creature of that statute, a statute that we as members of the legislature have the exclusive right to enact and to amend under long-standing precedent from the Minnesota Supreme Court. The legislature tells the PUC Commission what to do and how to do it. This amendment recognizes and specifies that the Commission must consider economic growth, job retention, and existing energy policy as non-cost factors. And secondly, it provides guidance for how utilities are to construct cost of service studies that are the primary basis but not the sole basis for setting rates. The intent of this amendment is to provide necessary guidance to both utilities and the Commission, while at the same time ensuring important policies we have already enacted are considered. I would hope that with the full understanding that this bill goes forward and is discussed further, we know it's being laid over, that this could be considered by the committee as an amendment that we could support.
Senator Senjum, do you have an opinion?
Mr. Chair and members, we've talked here, and this is an acceptable amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, although thought it was going to be something we could go on, but Senator Dibble, you're closest, and you both raised your hands at the same time. So, Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Simonson. I heard your description, and so I understand the intent. But this is pretty technical. So I don't know if Mr. Bull can help explain, but what is a single coincident peak methodology based upon the single peak contribution by class at the time of the public utilities system peak. What is an E8760 allocator for energy costs? I'm not sure what I'm voting on.
Senator Simonson?
Mr. Chair and Senator Dibble, clearly those are just, common definition terms, right? But I think, to be fair, Mr. Bull has just seen this probably for a few minutes, and I don't know that he may want to weigh in, but I would first maybe defer to Ms. Fontaine for potential explanation.
Mr. Chair, members, yes, when I received this amendment, I was not sure that those were all defined terms, especially like the E8760 allocator. So if this was adopted, I do think we'd need to work on any terms that are not defined in this amendment.
Senator Simonson, you may think it may be something you want to, because we are not moving this, perhaps you would want to withdraw this and include that so we can have a full amendment rather than doing it now, or it's your pleasure what you would like to do.
I think, Mr. Chair, sort of like we did Senator Rarick's amendment, I would prefer that we put it on, and then we'll absolutely commit to working on that as we go forward.
I'll go to Senator Marty first, and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Simonson, this, and I don't know if these other ones we were just handed are other ones that are going to be considered today too, but this bill is very quickly turning into one in which we're doing all sorts of things and shifting who pays the bills. This one from the large, we already have something in the bill about where we're making sure that commercial and industrial class has to be at least 5% below the national average. The other one here is the 20% below for the large customers. All of these things are going to be shifting totally. The PUC will do what we tell them to do, but I think we've had a fairly decent rate structure in the state, and I think that this one, I don't know how it fits in with the rest, but I think we're going backwards on a lot of these amendments.
Well, Senator Marty, we will have continued discussion if the body decides to put this on. Mr. Moratzka, you've come to the podium. Right?
Come to the rescue.
To the table. Podium, table. Close enough. You have something to add to this conversation on this amendment?
Mr. Chair, committee members, I'm happy to field any other questions regarding the technical language. I just came up for additional support on coincident peak definitions as well as the 8760, and I'm happy to answer those questions if the committee prefers.
Okay. I think at this point, because we are starting to run out of time, we'll see if we're going to put the amendment on or not. We can certainly deal with this. It's being laid over, so it's a work in progress. All those in favor of the AA amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Senator Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next amendment I would offer would be the A10 amendment.
Senator Simonson moves the A10 amendment. I believe that has been handed out. Senator Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. The A10 amendment is, it's a relatively simple clarification about where the utility monopoly ends and where the customer responsibility begins. Under Minnesota law, utilities do have a monopoly to provide service to customers in areas that we refer to as service territories. And as we all know, the laws of this state were designed originally, and we have seemingly always operated under the assumption that that monopoly ends at the customer's meter. We've had much discussion this session, and will clearly continue as we go forward to talk about examples of bills that are intended to reduce emissions or to reduce contributions of carbon into our atmosphere. Some of these bills will include beneficial electrification, fuel switching, and the promotion of electric vehicles. And at the same time, we can't inadvertently restrict the operations and the business of the private industries while at the same time expanding that utility's reach beyond the meter. So the amendment simply clarifies where the utility begins and ends, and I would hope that the committee would support it.
Senator Senjum, comments to the amendment?
This is a close one. I just think it takes us out a little bit out of the mission of the bill, a Clean Energy First initiative, that defines a process for moving in that direction. I'm going to suggest at least neutrality, and I'll probably vote against it.
Excuse me. Further discussion, Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe Mr. Bowl can answer this question. When we talk about electric service, and limitation of how we define service, how do we construe, for example, SIP programs, when we're working with customers on energy efficiency and conservation efforts? That's obviously lighting, building, building efforts. Would this restrain and have an effect on those sorts of services from utilities?
Mr. Bowe?
Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, I do think that the bill is intended to have some impact on the utilities' ability to own or control assets on the customer side of the meter. Things like electric vehicle chargers in people's garages, for example. We've been there, as the conversation has been going on over the past couple of years on these topics, this line between the customer side of the meter and the utility side of the meter is becoming somewhat blurred. And maybe sometimes to the benefit of customers, this would make a very clear line.
Senator Dibble, follow-up.
So I'm hearing Mr. Bull say that some of the advances and innovations in working with utility customers would be eliminated by this language.
Seeing no further discussion, Senator Marty.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm still unclear. I mean, we're excluding the service charging, the facilities for charging, monitoring consumption by electric vehicles. I know some of the co-ops have done things where they help balance their grid, and it brings down their rates for other customers by having people consume battery charging at certain times by that sort of thing. And so I guess I'm wondering, what is the impact of this? I can see what it says. I can see where it's drawing the line, but what's the impact of that? And I guess I'm curious if we're voting on these things that make change that, oh, what's this do? I don't know, it's something, but we got to consider it. I mean, that's what it seems we're voting on here, and I guess I would appreciate a little more information before just saying, okay, this is where we define the electric service for the utility and where it's for the customer, and then period. What's it mean? Oh, I don't know, but it's something we could consider.
Mr.
Maybe
Chair.
Senator Simonson, you could explain.
Senator Simonson.
And Mr. Chair and Senator Marty, there's no hidden agenda here, right? I mean, this really is trying to clarify what the practice has been for a long, long time. And I think as we go forward and we make significant changes to how we operate here in Minnesota with respect to how customers interact with the utility as things are changing, I think that there needs to be some bright line drawn, and that's exactly what this is trying to do.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A10 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. Senator Simonson. Senator Simonson moves the A7 amendment.
Mr. Chair, members.
Senator Simonson.
Again, what are we trying to do here, right? I mean, this is about energy-intensive customers. We have heard testimony more than once in this committee this session about iron mines and paper mills and how important and critical they are to northern Minnesota's economy. And that's what these amendments are about. As we move forward with this energy transition, we should all agree and accept the fact that costs to the ratepayers, both CI and residential, are going to increase. It's virtually impossible to get around that. But these businesses, and I'm not here on behalf of the businesses, but I am here on behalf of the people that work at these businesses, because it represents thousands of jobs in northern Minnesota, and it is critical to the economy of the Iron Range, as well as the city of Duluth and the surrounding communities. If any one of these paper mills gets a substantial increase in their power rate too quickly, they're going down the street, right? I mean, and that's not a threat, that's a reality. Verso Paper is a large company, employs 225 people in the city of Duluth, in my district. That's 200 plus families that depend on that job. And Verso is not headquartered in Minnesota. And I guarantee you, in the blink of an eye, they will go down south and they will operate and do their paper operation down there, and that'll be okay by them. So this is really an attempt to bring that factor to the table and into the discussion as we have this discussion. It is, again, Senator Senjum, I respect what you have here, and I think that this is the framework for what we do going forward, because we do need to transition our energy and how we generate our energy. But some of these discussions that are happening outside of this body don't take into consideration what the indirect impact is. So, Mr. Chair, the A7, pretty simple amendment, talks about, many of the bills this session are for new mandates and carbon-free energy supply, and those have a cost. We've just talked about that, and I think we understand that. The cost will be passed directly onto ratepayers. We should understand that. We just heard testimony again today about the impact for large industrial customers and what the rates have done over the last 10 years. And for many of these large industrial customers, their electricity cost is 25% of the overall cost of production, and that's a big deal. So this amendment is a simple mechanism to ensure that large industrial customers have a competitive electric rate so that they can compete. And again, I'm not saying that on behalf of the actual business, but I am saying that on behalf of all of the families and employees of those businesses.
Senator Senjum, your reaction or comments to A7 amendment?
Mr. Chair and members, with the A2 amendment, we came to at least a 5% agreement with the acceptance of that amendment, and 5% below national average. I just think for today with this bill, I mean, Senator Simonson may well have a matter worth discussing, but another day. Clean energy first is, who knows, a 20, 30, 35-year journey. And there's a lot of time looking forward, I think, to, and, clean energy is not going to unfold that fast. I think we can have this discussion another time where we have a hearing and give it probably a more thoughtful consideration to this. So I would vote, I would oppose the amendment.
Senator Marty?
Mr. Chair, Senator Simonson, I remember about 6 years ago when we did the first EIT, the intensive users, separate factors for them, and a lot of the northern Minnesota legislators, especially in Minnesota Power Territory, were saying, we need this, we need this, we need this. And it passed, and I remember Representative Anzelt, former Representative Anzelt, who was immediately said, well, maybe we shouldn't have done this, when they were seeing what it meant for other people's rates. And it was a kind of be careful what you wish for. I think these issues deserve careful attention. I think the PUC is the best place for these to be decided, how we structure electrical rate structure. But the legislature clearly has the ability to do this. I just think that this is shooting from the hip and has a lot of what residential customers may call huge, I don't think they're unintended consequences, but huge consequences that I don't think they like. And I think this is something that, I don't know if this is the appropriate bill either, but I'd speak against the amendment because I think this is, we got 5% below national rates for commercial industrial. For the large ones, now we're going to give 20% below those. I mean, why don't we just declare residential pay at least 20% below national rates too, and we can force everybody to do that. It doesn't work that way. You have to have somebody pay the bills, and if you're going to give the biggest breaks to the largest customers, you're going to be giving the biggest increases to somebody else.
Before I go back to Senator Simonson, I think I really agree with you on this one, Senator Marty. I hope we can sell this with Senator or Representative Wigenius when the time comes. Senator Simonson.
Mr. Chair, Senator Marty, Senator Senjum, again, your points are well taken, but I go back to the example that you gave, Senator Marty, when we talked about that a number of years ago. I don't know that there was this incredible push to move towards a higher degree of renewable energy. I mean, let's be honest, this conversation has evolved across our state, across our nation over the last couple of years to a significant level, and I'm sure that everybody up here receives the same emails that I do demanding some sort of action. So as we take this action, and action will happen, I mean, it's inevitable, whether it's this year or next year or the year after, something is going to happen. I think it's really important that we make this consideration. And I'm not suggesting to anybody that 20% is the right number. We have 5% in the amended version of the bill, but I am suggesting, as Chair Osmick just talked about, when we get to the point where we have discussions with others, perhaps starting at 20 is not such a bad place to be starting. And whether or not we like it, we are going to have to figure out who's going to pay for this. Because if we insist that our large CI customers pay this bill, they're gone, right? I mean, the mines aren't going to go away. The resources are going to remain in the ground, but they're going to find other ways to import that ore to make that steel, and it's not going to be good. And we're going to be back here talking about the indirect impact of what we did. I think what we need to do is good. But we need to be considerate, and I think starting at 20 is a better place to start.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A7 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Senator Dibble. Division has been called. All those in favor of the A7 amendment signify by raising your hand, please. All those opposed, please raise your hand.
Guess we're more vocal.
The chair's ears are working correctly. The amendment is adopted. They're perfectly fine. I got it right. Senator Simonson, anything additional?
Mr. Chair, I have one more. I have the A12.
Senator Simonson moves the A12 amendment.
Oh, we don't see that.
Mr. Chair, members, the
Senator Simonson.
A12 should be a little bit less controversial, perhaps. It simply makes the point that job retention and our economy must be factors to be considered in any resource planning decision. That is as simple as it gets.
Further discussion. Senator Marty?
Mr. Chair, I wonder if we could divide it. I'm not sure where after line 1.5, or I want to separate out the bottom portion, the clause 6.
So Senator Marty, you move to separate at line 1. Which
Between
line?
1.5 and 1.6, I think maybe Senate Council can tell us where the appropriate place
Ms.
is.
Fontaine agrees with you. So Senator Marty moves to divide
Just divide it, yeah.
amendment. So we will work on the first section of the amendment on the A12, lines 1 through 1.1 through 1.5. Further discussion to that portion of the amendment. Seeing none, Senator Senjum, your feelings on this?
Yeah, yes, I'm all right with this. Yes.
All those in favor of the A12 lines 1.1 through 1.5 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. To the additional portions, line 1.6 through 1.11. Senator Marty.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think that the point of the resource planning process, it's appropriate to consider things like job growth in the economy. It's not that any doubt. We're telling them if there's any close call, any doubt whatsoever, you're saying we're going to toss it in favor of one side. You're tilting the scale very heavily in favor of this. I don't think that's appropriate and urge you to reject this or remove or withdraw that amendment.
Senator Senjum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like job growth and strong economies and job retention, and so I'm for this.
Further discussion to the second half, lines 1.6 through 1.11. Seeing none, all those in favor of the second part of the bill or of the amendment 1.6 through 1.11 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Senator Simonson, any further amendments?
That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Well, you know, first of all, Senator Senjum, I am so honored that you brought this bill because it opened up a history of conversations that you actually started in this body years ago about how we can think beyond the box. And you know, members, we all know that if you trace power lines far enough, you'll eventually find coal, gas, and nuclear plant, or perhaps a solar panel or a wind turbine. And so I have a question, Mr. Bull, for you. what is the process that energy gets created through, whether you're using in a nuke plant? How does that energy get formed when you're doing that, please?
Mr. Bull.
Mr. Chair, Senator Hoffman, I believe it's electromagnetic things happening.
And thank you. And Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you for that, Mr. Bull. Thank you for that highly technical answer.
And he
I was
did.
a religion major, Mr.
Well, let me
Senator
ask,
Hoffman.
if I could ask Mr. Bull one more question, or Mr. Senator Senjum, and it's, how do you control emissions? The emission control on sulfur is brought down by what mechanism? What is that is used to control sulfur and emissions?
Mr. Bull.
Mr. Chair, Senator Hoffman, I don't know. Am I going to say electromagnetic again?
No, Mr. Chair, members.
Senator Hoffman.
What I'm looking for is the term water. You know, energy that 65% of all U.S. electricity comes from power generators that need cooling, right? Water is central to hydroelectric. It's also used in the emissions control on sulfur. So when you look at 100 billion gallons per day of water that's used just in generating electricity, that needs to travel through pipes, right? Those pipes have to travel along. And so with that, the connection is Senator Senjum has had in the past Senate File 3910, various floor amendments. So I have the A14 amendment, Senator Senjum, that is in honor of you, and it is after page 8. On page 8, after line 16, insert the following, and the following is in front of you. So you probably already have this what is it called, memorized by then. So with that, members, A14 for Senator Senjum is there. Senator Senjum, please respond.
Senator Hoffman moves the A14 amendment. Senator Senjum, just before we begin that, I'd just like to quote you from the Senate floor. I'm not sure if I got it exactly correct. In a DNR bill, you said fish swim in water, water goes through pipes, sprinklers. So please give us your reaction to A14.
Mr. Chair, thus it is germane.
Well, Senator Hoffman, I think you might make the amendment of the year here. Maybe on the floor you get to do this one again.
Oh, my.
Senator Senjum.
Mr. Chair and members, I cannot believe in my whole life I would ever advise against voting for my sprinkler amendment, but today I must. And I don't think it's consistent with the goals of Clean Energy First, but it's a darn good amendment nonetheless. So
Senator Hoffman,
I would recommend a no vote.
Senator Hoffman withdraws his A14 joke. Any further discussion before we lay the bill over, members? I appreciate Senator Hoffman's, we conspired in the hallway when I was out for just a few minutes, and I thought it was a great ending to today's committee hearing. Any further discussion? We are going to lay this over for further use.
Real quickly, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to go back to my first words. I do think as we look forward, and we had a program or at least a presentation a couple of years ago, I think, suggesting that by 2040, most if not all of the power plants in Minnesota be retired. So then what are we going to do? And along the way of what are we going to do, I think the Clean Energy First proposal does provide for us a recipe to get there. And it's a recipe that certainly drives renewable energy. I know that. But I think thinking about that, as I said earlier, technology will drive renewable energy, the environmental concerns will, politics will, cost will, job creation will, large businesses that need the brand will, environmental concerns related to climate change will, whether we like that or not, but it will. And so this is the bill we have before us. I know it needs a little bit more work. I'm willing to work on this. I'm not going to give up. It's important going forward, and I do appreciate the time that this committee has given to this bill today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Senator Senjum. So, members, just to give you an idea, this bill is probably going to be queued back up on the week of the 25th, so we will have a week's worth of time to produce additional amendments, do further discussion, et cetera, et cetera. So, with that, Senate File 1456 is laid over for future consideration. Members, just as a highlight for next week, we're going to be hearing from Commerce on Tuesday. We also are going to be taking up the omnibus, quote-unquote, omnibus RDA spend bill that I have been discussing earlier, I think, with members. And we will also take up the contiguous counties language that was previous on the Senate floor and has been proposed. So those are what we're looking for in next week. So with no further business in front of this committee is adjourned.